She could hear their boots before she saw their faces. Heavy steps dragging through the mud, each one slower than the last. Retreat. A word no soldier wanted to admit, yet it clung to them like the smoke in the air. The squad looked broken, hollow-eyed. Some carried the wounded. Others carried nothing, not even the will to look back. But she didn't move. She knelt by the edge of the crater, rifle steady, her breath sinking with the rhythm she had trained for years to master. Why wasn't she following them? One of the men glanced over his shoulder, frustration tightening his jaw. "We're falling back. Did you not hear the order?" His voice cracked with exhaustion more than anger. She heard him, she just didn't answer. Her cheek pressed gently against the worn stock of her rifle, eyes fixed on the horizon where the tree line shivered under the weight of silence. She felt it before they did. Something was coming. And if she turned away now, if she left with them, that silence would soon be filled with screams. Her finger rested near the trigger, not yet tightening but ready. A tremor of wind brushed her cheek, carrying with it the faint metallic sting of shell casings left behind. Her ears caught the shift, a twig breaking, too deliberate to be nature. The enemy wasn't finished. She exhaled, slow, steady. They called it discipline. For her it was survival. The squad kept moving, their silhouettes shrinking into the haze. No one tried to drag her with them this time. They knew her, or at least they thought they did. The quiet one, the one who didn't laugh at crude jokes, didn't boast about kills, didn't talk about home. A shadow in the corner of the barracks. Easy to overlook, easier still to underestimate. But right now, as they stumbled away, they were leaving their lives in her hands without even realizing it. A shape flickered at the tree line, then another, then more. She saw the way the branches moved unnaturally, the way rifles gleamed in quick slivers of light. They were waiting for the squad to collapse fully into retreat, to break apart before striking. Her jaw tightened, not yet. A drop of sweat slid past her temple, stinging her eye, but she didn't blink. She couldn't. She remembered something her father used to say before he left for his deployments. The quietest second before dawn is when the wolves decide if the sheep will live. She steadied, counted, 1, 2, 3. The first target stepped into the open. A scout, overconfident, assuming his prey had no teeth left. Her shot broke the silence like glass. The crack echoed across the valley, sharp, defiant. Birds exploded from the branches. The scout's body jerked and crumpled, lifeless before he hit the earth. The rest froze, then chaos. Muzzle flashes sparked among the trees. Bullets whistled overhead, kicking dirt and stone into the air. She slid back behind the crater's ridge, the impact of their return fire shaking the ground around her. Her heart thudded against her ribs, but her breathing remained steady. She learned long ago that panic was louder than bullets. Another deep inhale, another slow exhale. She peeked through the scope, movement everywhere but sloppy. The enemy hadn't expected resistance. They thought the retreat meant surrender. One shot, another, then another. Each trigger pull precise, each breath a measure of time. Bodies fell. Confusion rippled through the tree line. She wasn't just firing, she was dictating their pace, halting their momentum with every well-placed round. Behind her the squad had heard. They had stopped. Some turned, disbelief etched into their faces. She could almost hear their thoughts. She stayed. She's holding them back. But she didn't turn to see them. Not yet. Because there was something she hadn't told them. Not about the training she endured before ever wearing their uniform. Not about the one mission that broke her, the one no file dared to mention. And not about the promise she carried in silence every single day, the reason her hands never trembled, the reason retreat never sat right with her. A burst of automatic fire chewed the crater's edge, showering her with dirt. She shifted her position, crawling low, rolling to her side, never lingering in one place long enough to be marked. The rifle became an extension of her body, fluid, natural, inevitable. The enemy was advancing, but cautiously now. She had reminded them of something they had forgotten. Retreat doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it means bait. Her squad didn't know it, but she had just bought them minutes. Minutes to regroup, minutes to breathe, minutes to decide whether they would keep running or find their courage again. One of the younger soldiers, Ramirez, barely 20, eyes too soft for war, dropped to his knees beside her. His chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. Why aren't you moving? You'll get killed here." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tracked another shadow breaking from cover, fired, and watched it collapse. Only then did she glance at him, her expression unreadable, voice calm. "Because if I don't, you will." The boy swallowed, the weight of her words settling heavier than the rifle slung over his shoulder. For the first time since the retreat began, he didn't look like he wanted to run. Bullets still hissed and cracked, tearing through branches, snapping against stone. The air tasted of cordite and ash. Yet in the chaos she felt the strange stillness that always came over her in these moments, the world narrowing to breath, scope, target, silence. But still, beneath it all, something burned in her chest. Not just duty, not just discipline, something older, something personal. She thought of her brother, his smile before his last deployment, the folded flag that waited for her on the kitchen table when she came home from training, the unanswered questions, the words no one said, the hollow space his absence left in her chest. And she remembered her promise, that she would not run when others did, that she would stand where he couldn't. Her jaw set. She pressed her cheek back against the stock, eye locked into the scope. If this was the last stand, it wouldn't be silent. What makes a soldier stop running? The question lingered in Ramirez's eyes as he pressed closer into the dirt, his breath shallow and uneven. He wanted to move. Every instinct screamed at him to get back to the others, to escape the storm of fire ripping across the tree line. Yet he stayed, because she stayed. Her rifle barked again. Another shadow folded into the grass. The silence between shots was worse than the gunfire. It was the silence of someone who knew she couldn't afford to miss. The boy whispered, "You can't hold them forever." She didn't flinch. Her scope swept left, then right. She could see their pattern now. The enemy was probing, pushing from different angles, trying to flush her out. But they didn't know her patience. They didn't know she could wait longer than they could breathe. Her answer came quiet, steady. "I don't need forever, I just need enough." Enough for the others to find their footing. Enough to shift this retreat from collapse into survival. Enough to carve out a chance where there was none. Another shot. Another life ended. She didn't celebrate, didn't even allow herself the smallest smirk. Every trigger pull was weight, and she carried them all in silence. Behind her she could sense movement. The squad hadn't gone far. Some were returning, hesitating at the edge of the ridge. They weren't charging back into the fight, not yet, but they were no longer running. That was something. The radio crackled. Static at first, then the clipped voice of Sergeant Hale, hoarse with fatigue. "Positions, dig in. I want fields of fire established now." There it was, the shift. One voice strong enough to catch the falling pieces. Her shots had bought him just enough time to remember what leadership was supposed to sound like. Ramirez glanced back, relief washing across his mud-streaked face. They're regrouping. She didn't answer. She stayed with her scope, her silence speaking louder than any words could. Because she also knew the truth. Regrouping wasn't enough. Not here, not against numbers like this. She saw it in the tree line. More movement. Dozens, maybe more. The enemy had committed. What had started as a hunt for stragglers was turning into a push to finish the job. They wanted blood. They wanted to bury the retreat before it could harden into resistance. Her pulse slowed, not quickened. Fear was useless now. She shifted positions again, crawling low, brushing past the broken helmets and spent casings that littered the crater. Each scar in the earth told the story of those who hadn't made it this far. She muttered under her breath, not for Ramirez, not for anyone, just for herself. "Hold steady." A memory surfaced. Years earlier, A range no one else wanted to practice on, wind screaming through the valley, knocking bullets wide. She was still a trainee, still proving she belonged in a world that doubted her every second. They laughed when her first shots missed. The wind's too strong, they said, too much for someone her size. But she stayed, adjusted, learned. Hours became days, and when she finally placed shot after shot into the same circle, the laughter turned into silence. That was when she learned that steady didn't mean still. Steady meant alive, adjusting, bending without breaking. The lesson had carried her here. The squad was shifting now, voices shouting, hands digging, weapons braced against the dirt. They weren't running anymore. They were fighting, because one of them had refused to leave. A mortar thumped in the distance. She heard it before she saw it. Instinct threw her flat arm covering Ramirez as the shell shrieked overhead and exploded a dozen meters behind them. The ground heaved. Dirt and fire showered down. The boy coughed, his ears ringing. She pushed him deeper into cover, her eyes narrowing. Mortars meant coordination. This wasn't just a chase anymore. The enemy wanted annihilation. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with the realization of what this meant. She whispered it before she could stop herself. "They're going to break us here." Ramirez turned, his face pale, his voice trembling. "Then why are you still?" The crack of her rifle cut him off. Another enemy dropped. She chambered another round, voice low but unwavering. "Because breaking isn't the same as ending." He didn't understand, not fully, but something in her tone silenced his panic. The minutes bled into each other. The fight stretched long, brutal, unrelenting. She lost track of how many she had dropped. 10, 15, maybe more. Each one bought another breath for the squad. Each one carried the weight of her brother's face. The enemy pressed harder, their shouts echoing across the field, rifles blazing. The squad answered back now, their fear burning into something sharper: defiance. Sergeant Hale's voice roared over the gunfire. "On my mark, suppress and shift." For the first time since the retreat began, they moved like soldiers again. She adjusted her scope. She wasn't just shooting anymore. She was guiding, cutting down anyone who threatened their flanks, anyone who aimed for the exposed. Her rifle was more than a weapon. It was a thread stitching the squad's courage back together. But still, in the quiet corners of her mind, doubt whispered. How long could she keep this up? How many more minutes could she steal before the weight of numbers crushed them? Her muscles ached, her eyes burned. The dirt pressed into her skin, mixing with sweat, blood, memory. And yet through it all, she kept seeing her brother's smile. That last night before he left, he had told her she wasn't made for war, that she was made for something softer, kinder. She had laughed then, but now, kneeling in the crater with the world on fire around her, she wondered if he had been right. Except he never came back, and she was still here. Her jaw tightened, the scope steadied, another enemy fell. She whispered his name under her breath, a prayer, a promise. Every shot was for him. Another mortar whined overhead. Closer this time. The explosion tore into the ground just behind the squad, flinging bodies forward. Screams cut through the smoke. Her gut twisted. She couldn't cover them all, not forever. She shifted, teeth gritted, voice breaking into the radio for the first time that day. "You need to move, now." Static crackled, then Hale's strained voice. "We're pinned, we can't." Her rifle barked again, silencing another advance. She interrupted louder, sharper. "You can, you will, or you die here." The squad hesitated. Then, one by one, they began to shift, dragging the wounded, covering each other, stumbling forward through the smoke. She didn't move with them. Ramirez's eyes widened. "You're staying." She didn't answer, not with words, just a look, firm, final. Because there was still one truth she hadn't told them. The retreat wasn't her end, it was her beginning. What keeps a person rooted when every survival instinct begs them to run? The squad was moving again, stumbling forward through the smoke. their shapes blurring against the chaos of fire and dust. They weren't fast, they weren't clean, but they were alive, because she had made them believe it was possible. But she hadn't moved. Her cheek stayed pressed to the rifle's worn stock, her body anchored in the crater like it had grown roots there. To Ramirez, who lingered at her side, it didn't make sense. His heart was a hammer in his chest, desperate to flee, yet hers beat with the patience of a clock. He grabbed her sleeve. "Why aren't you with them?" Her eye never left the scope. "Because someone has to hold the door." Another shot, another target collapsed. The boy flinched at the sound, his voice cracked. "But you'll die." She cut him off, her whisper like stone. "Then let it be on my feet, not my back." For a moment he just stared. Then he let go. He didn't argue again. Something in her tone made it clear her decision wasn't a choice anymore. It was a vow. The battlefield shifted. The enemy, realizing their quarry was slipping away, surged harder, faster. Their shouts grew closer, their gunfire angrier. They wanted to crush the retreat before it solidified. And at the center of it, holding the thin thread of resistance together, was her. The earth trembled with another mortar impact. The crater rattled, throwing dirt over her shoulders. Her ears rang. She forced her focus back into the scope, fighting the fog creeping into her head. The world had narrowed, breath, target, squeeze, silence. And then something changed. Through the smoke she saw them. Not just shadows. Faces. Young faces, eyes wide with the same fear she had seen in Ramirez's moments earlier. They weren't nameless enemies now. They were boys sent forward, pushed into this slaughter by commanders who would never touch the mud. Her stomach clenched. Her finger hovered on the trigger. This was the part no one taught you about. They trained you to fire, to survive, to win. But no one trained you for the weight of seeing yourself in the ones you killed. Her brother's face flickered in her mind. Not in his uniform, not with a rifle, just him at 16, grinning at the wheel of their father's old truck. She blinked hard, pushed it away, and fired. The boy in her scope crumpled. Silence roared in her ears. Ramirez flinched again, his lips pressed tight. He wanted to say something, but didn't. Maybe he understood. Maybe he couldn't. She chambered the next round, steadying herself. If she let herself think too much, she'd falter. And faltering meant death, not just for her, but for the squad still dragging their wounded through the chaos she held at bay. Her breath steadied again. She pressed into the rifle, fired, fired again. Each pull of the trigger was another second carved out of the impossible. But in the back of her mind, the question gnawed. How many more seconds could she carve before they carved her instead? The radio crackled. Hale's voice came through, strained, breaking with static. "We're clear of the ridge, still under fire but moving. What's your status?" She pressed her mic with muddy fingers. Her voice was flat. "Holding." A pause, then Hale again, harsher this time. "That wasn't the order, pull back now." Her eyes stayed on the scope. Another shot. Another enemy fell. Her reply came cold. "You wouldn't be moving if I had." Silence, then just static. She knew what that meant. He couldn't argue, not anymore. The gunfire around her intensified. Bullets chewed the dirt inches from her face. Splinters rained as branches above her head shattered. She rolled, shifting positions again, never letting herself become a mark. Ramirez had gone pale, gripping his weapon but barely firing. His breaths came shallow, panicked. She glanced at him once briefly. "You need to go." He shook his head violently. "I can't." "You can, you will." Her tone was sharp, cutting through his fear. "Find them, help carry the wounded. Don't waste what I'm giving you." Tears burned in his eyes, but he nodded. He hesitated only a second longer before crawling away, then running low through the smoke toward the retreating shapes of his squad. And just like that, she was alone. The battlefield closed in. The silence of her solitude pressed harder than the gunfire. Every echo carried weight now. Every breath sounded louder in her ears. She felt the earth tremble beneath her palms, the vibrations of boots approaching. She adjusted her rifle, but the chamber clicked empty. Her last magazine was gone. Her chest tightened. The barrel smoked, the metal hot against her hands. She slid back, dug into her pouch 2 rounds, only 2. She loaded them carefully, deliberately. Not out of hope, not out of desperation, out of respect. If these were her last, they would count. The first came quick, an enemy who thought her stillness meant surrender. He fell before he even raised his rifle. The second she waited, held. The smoke parted just enough and she saw him, a commander, barking orders, pushing his men forward. She drew her breath steady, her fingers squeezed. The shot rang true. The man collapsed, his shouts cut mid-word. The chaos rippled, confusion spreading through the line. She exhaled long and slow. The rifle clicked empty. And then the world around her roared. Gunfire crashed from every side. Boots pounded closer. The crater erupted with dirt and fire. She dropped the rifle, pulling her sidearm, body coiled low. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but her eyes were calm. This was the moment she had chosen, the second she didn't retreat. Not an ending, a door, and she was holding it. As the first figure charged the rim of the crater, she rose to meet him. What happens when the rifle goes silent? The first soldier lunged over the rim of the crater, rifle raised, eyes wide with the hunger of an easy kill. But what he found wasn't weakness. It was her, rising from the dirt, pistol steady, eyes like ice. Her shot cracked before his finger touched the trigger. His body crumpled at her feet, tumbling into the crater with a thud. No time to breathe. Another shadow climbed the edge. She pivoted, squeezed, dropped him too. The pistol's recoil jolted her wrist, sharp, but her grip didn't falter. She fired again and again until the slide snapped back on an empty chamber. Click. Silence. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the storm surged again. Gunfire shredded the crater's rim. Bullets screamed through the smoke. She dropped low, dirt raining onto her back. Her empty pistol weighed heavy in her hands. She tossed it aside, fingers already fumbling through her vest, pulling free the last magazine she had forgotten. Half full. She slammed it in, yanked the slide, and exhaled, steady. But as she peeked over the rim, she saw the truth. The enemy wasn't breaking. Not yet. The death of their commander had rattled them, but numbers were their weapon, and they had plenty left to spend. Her body ached, her ears rang, her lungs burned with every breath. Still she stood. The first burst of pistol fire dropped another attacker, but it wasn't the same. The pistol didn't have the range, didn't carry the weight of her rifle. She was fighting inches now, not meters. And the inches were closing fast. A grenade clinked against the dirt. Her stomach dropped. She dove, scooping it up, hurling it back over the rim just as it detonated midair. The shockwave punched her chest, threw her sideways. Her head slammed against stone, stars bursting behind her eyes. For a moment everything blurred. Sound dulled, vision swam. She tasted blood on her tongue. But through the haze she heard it, a voice, distant at first, then closer. Ramirez. Cover her, move, move. She blinked, forcing her eyes to focus. Shapes burst through the smoke, her squad, not retreating now, not running, charging back, rifles blazing, their shouts cutting through the chaos. Her chest clenched, they had come back. Sergeant Hale's voice roared over the din. Hold the line, push them back. She staggered to her knees, pistol raised again, firing into the wave of enemies spilling over the ridge. The squad crashed into them. A wall of desperation hardened into defiance. It wasn't clean, it wasn't polished, it was raw survival. Ramirez slid beside her, firing wild, his hands shaking but his jaw set. "We're not leaving you," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear and fire. She wanted to tell him he should have run, that this wasn't the plan, that she had chosen to be the one to stay, but the words wouldn't come. Not because she couldn't speak, but because part of her, buried deep, was grateful. For once she wasn't alone. The fight stretched brutal and endless. The enemy pressed hard, desperate to break them before nightfall. Every meter of ground was drenched in fire and blood. She moved like a ghost among them, pistol barking, hands steady even as her body screamed. She kicked one soldier back, stole his rifle, turned it against him before the body hit the ground. Her silence spoke louder than the chaos around her. Hale caught her eye once, just once, between bursts of fire. His expression was something she hadn't seen in him before, not command, not anger. Respect. But she didn't hold his gaze long. The battlefield didn't allow sentiment. Still in the back of her mind, she felt the weight shifting. The squad wasn't retreating anymore. They were fighting with her, not behind her, and it was changing them. One soldier, Harris, who had been silent since dawn, muttered as he reloaded, his voice breaking. "I thought this was it. I thought we were done." Another, Nguyen, laughed bitterly through gritted teeth. "Still might be." But Harris shook his head, his eyes fixed on her. "Not while she's standing." The words weren't meant for her to hear, but she did, and they struck deeper than any bullet. Because she knew the truth. She wasn't standing because she was unbreakable. She was standing because she didn't know how else to keep her brother's promise alive. The enemy faltered. Their lines wavered, confusion spreading. The loss of their commander still lingered, and now the retreating prey had teeth. Hale seized the moment. His voice cut sharp across the ridge. "Push, drive them back." The squad surged, a roar of desperation turning into momentum. Shots rang, bodies fell. The tree line erupted in chaos as the enemy broke into fragments. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm eased. The survivors fled into the woods, their shouts fading into the distance. Silence fell heavy, suffocating. The squad stood, chests heaving, faces streaked with blood and dirt. No one cheered. No one smiled. Victory wasn't a word that belonged here. She lowered her rifle, not hers, stolen, heavy in her hands. Her arms trembled now that the firing had stopped. She sank to one knee, pressing her hand against the dirt to steady herself. Ramirez knelt beside her, eyes wide, voice raw. "You saved us." She shook her head slow. Her voice came quiet, almost a whisper. "No, we saved each other." The boy frowned, not understanding but didn't push. Hale stepped forward, his gaze heavy. He looked at her differently now, as if seeing her for the first time. His voice was low, rough. "You bought us the chance. Don't think I don't see it." She didn't answer, she couldn't. Because inside, beneath the dirt and blood, she felt something tearing. Not her body, though it ached everywhere, but her heart. She had lived another day, yes. But every face she had seen through her scope, every body that fell, clung to her. And when night came, when the fire burned low and the squad settled into uneasy silence, she sat apart, alone. Her rifle lay across her lap. Her hands rested on it like a prayer. Ramirez watched her from a distance, wanting to speak but knowing better. Hale lit a cigarette, staring into the darkness, his thoughts his own. The battlefield was quiet now, but inside her the storm still raged. Because she knew this wasn't the end. Not for them, and certainly not for her. She stared into the night, her brother's face flickering in her mind. And for the first time since the retreat began, she let herself whisper the truth she had buried deep. "I don't know how much longer I can carry this." The words vanished into the night. No one heard. And still she sat steady, silent. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The trigger was cool beneath her fingertip, not squeezed, not yet, just there, resting, waiting. The air carried a strange weight, heavy with ash and damp pine. Smoke curled upward from what had been their forward line, a scattering of blackened stone walls and torn sandbags, now swallowed by silence. Every sound felt too sharp, too close. A snapped twig, a crow's wings, even her own heartbeat. Behind her, boots kept stumbling back. Soldiers she had lived, fought, bled beside. Their retreat had no rhythm, no cadence, just scattered desperation. She didn't blame them. Hours of artillery, days of being cut off, weeks of orders that seemed more about survival than strategy. Anyone would feel it. Anyone would break. But not her, not yet. She adjusted the scope, breath narrowing to a thread. The tree line wavered in the distance, shadows swaying where light and branches tangled. Too much movement, too careful to be wind. She knew. They were waiting for the retreat to collapse fully, waiting to close in like wolves once the last of her people disappeared down the valley. The voice returned closer this time. Sergeant Hale. His throat was raw from shouting through dust and fire. "Evelyn," his voice cracked across the ruin. "That's an order, we're pulling out now." She didn't look at him. Orders. The word meant something once. Once when command had answers. Once before those answers became excuses. Her steady aim traced the horizon. Something glinted, just for a second. Metal, glass. The tilt of a rifle scope. She stilled. Her cheek pressed deeper against the stock. Silence expanded. She slowed her breathing until it almost disappeared. Then there, a figure, blurred against the bark. Camouflage too clean for these woods. Movement too precise. She whispered inside her chest, so quietly the air itself seemed to lean closer. "Not yet. Don't move too soon." A memory stirred, sharp as the mountain wind. Her father's voice, not on a battlefield but in a narrow field where frost still clung to the grass. She had been 12. The old rifle was too long for her arms, too heavy for her shoulder, but he'd made her hold it anyway. "You don't win by firing first," he'd said softly, standing behind her. "You win by being the last one steady enough to fire right." Her father had never been a soldier, just a hunter, a man who believed patience could feed a family when hope couldn't. She hadn't understood then. She did now. The figure in the scope shifted. A helmet tilted, scanning. Another shape followed, then another. They were spreading along the tree line, quiet, deliberate. So it was true. This wasn't retreat, this was pursuit. Her finger curled, slow, deliberate. "Evelyn," Hale's voice again, closer, harsher. She heard him stumble over a stone. "Damn it, we don't have time for this." Her lips parted, words almost leaving her, but none came. What could she say? That if she left now, every man limping down that valley would be slaughtered within minutes. That retreat wasn't survival, it was bait. They wouldn't believe her. Not yet. She exhaled, long and steady. And squeezed. The crack tore the air apart. Birds erupted from the branches in a frenzy. The echo rolled down the mountainside like thunder. One figure dropped, silent, just dropped. The others froze, she didn't. Second breath, second squeeze, another crack, another fall. Now the tree line was alive, shouts in a foreign tongue, flashes of movement. Wolves caught too soon in their own snare. She shifted slightly, finding cover behind the jagged rim of the crater. Breath, adjust, fire, breath, adjust, fire. Every shot a note in the only language she had left. The squad had stopped moving. She could feel their stares burning into her back. Confusion, fear, something else too, hesitation. Hale was the first to speak, his voice no longer anger but disbelief. "She's holding them." Another soldier muttered, "God, it's just her." "No, not just." She bit down the thought, steadying again. The recoil thudded against her shoulder, sharp but familiar. The taste of iron clung to her mouth from the dust. Her fingers were steady, but her chest burned. Every breath cut deeper than the last. She knew what she was doing. She knew what it meant. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about time. Giving them minutes they didn't deserve. Minutes they hadn't asked for. Minutes that might just keep them alive long enough to reach the ridgeline. A shadow of doubt pressed in. "But what about you, Evelyn?" She shoved it away. One doubt, one heartbeat too long, and the tree line would spill into the open. The enemy began firing back. Not wild, controlled. These weren't amateurs. Bullets chewed into the dirt inches from her cheek. Splinters exploded from the crater wall. The smell of gunpowder thickened, clinging to the back of her throat. She adjusted, low and precise. The scope fogged briefly from her breath. She wiped it with the edge of her glove. Focus. Breathe. Wait. Another figure, another fall. But they were learning, moving differently now, smarter, using the trees, the rocks. Her window was closing. Behind her, Hale barked to the others. Move, go, get them down the valley, now. Finally, they listened. Boots pounded the dirt again, but this time not in defeat. This time with urgency, fueled by the cover she bought them. Yet Hale didn't move, not far. She felt his presence a few feet behind, crouched low. He didn't speak at first, just watched, breathing heavy. Then quietly, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eye stayed on the scope. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. Another shot cracked, another body dropped. Her shoulder throbbed from the rifle's recoil. Her throat was raw from holding her breath so often. Still, she stayed. One more, then another, always one more. But even as she fired, even as she bought them seconds, a truth pressed harder against her ribs. She couldn't hold forever, not against this many, not alone. The question crawled back into her mind, sharper this time. "And when they reach you, Evelyn, what then?" She didn't answer it, not yet. She focused on the only thing she could control: steady aim, steady breath. For now, that was enough. The night clung to the mountainside like a second skin, thick and suffocating. Evelyn lay prone on the ridge, her rifle pressed into the crook of her shoulder, eyes fixed on the faint glow of movement below. The valley had turned into a hunting ground. Not theirs. Not anymore. Breath by breath, she steadied herself. The cold gnawed at her fingers, but she refused to let them tremble. One flicker of hesitation, one slip, and the shadows creeping up the slope would break through. Behind her, the squad was huddled inside the fractured remains of an abandoned shepherd's hut. Broken timbers leaned against stone like ribs against lungs. Their whispers leaked out between the cracks, low, fearful, restless. She heard every word even when they thought she couldn't. "How much longer can she keep this up?" one muttered. "As long as she has to," Hale answered, his voice tired yet unyielding. They didn't understand. None of them. It wasn't just about keeping the enemy at bay. It was about the promise Evelyn had never spoken aloud, the one buried in silence, carried like a stone in her chest since the day she signed her name. The sound of boots scuffing rock snapped her focus back to the present. Movement, 3 of them, maybe 4, crawling low through the brush, trying to flank. Clever, but not clever enough. She adjusted her scope, the reticle brushing over the first shadow, a slow exhale, a single squeeze, the figure crumpled, soundless. The others froze, but only for a moment. Panic pushed them into motion. 2 ran, 1 dropped to the ground, firing blind into the darkness. Bullets tore through the grass near her, sparking off stone. She didn't flinch. Another controlled squeeze, second target down. The third broke into a sprint, desperate to close the gap. Evelyn tracked him, calm against his frenzy. The rifle cracked. Silence followed. Her cheek remained pressed against the stock, her breathing level, though inside, fatigue gnawed at her bones. She had been here before, in another place, another war, when she wasn't the only one standing between survival and collapse. That time, she had made a mistake. She had retreated with the others, followed orders, believed the promises of higher ground. 26 souls hadn't made it through. She had carried their silence ever since. A soft crunch of gravel at her back pulled her from the memory. Hale crouched beside her, the pale outline of his face lit by the faint moonlight. His eyes studied her, wary but grateful. "You bought us another hour," he murmured. She didn't look at him. Her eye never left the tree line. "An hour won't be enough." Hale's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. Supplies were low. Ammunition almost gone. The squad could barely walk, let alone fight. They had been reduced to shadows of soldiers, shells carrying fear and stubbornness in equal measure. He leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "Why are you still here, Evelyn? You could have gone with them. No one would have blamed you. The question hung between them heavy. She let it linger, let the silence speak before her words did. "Because I owe them," she said finally, her voice steady but raw. "And because if I don't hold, none of us leave this mountain alive." Hale studied her a moment longer, then nodded. He didn't press. He didn't need to. Some truths were better carried than explained. A distant rumble echoed through the valley, the unmistakable grind of armored treads. Evelyn's stomach knotted. The enemy was bringing machines now. Not just hunters, not just infantry. They meant to crush what was left of them. Hale heard it too. His face tightened, shadows carving deeper lines across his features. "We can't fight that." Evelyn's finger tapped lightly against the trigger guard, a restless rhythm. "No, but we can delay it." "Delay?" Hale frowned. "With what? Half a magazine and a prayer." Her lips almost curved at that. Almost. Sometimes a prayer is enough if the aim is steady. The rumble grew louder, closer. The ground itself began to vibrate beneath her chest. She shifted her position, adjusting her angle. If they brought armor up this slope, they'd have to funnel through the narrow pass. A choke point. It wasn't much, but it was something. Inside the hut, the squad stirred, panic threading through their whispers. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else began praying. Evelyn tuned them out. Panic was noise. Prayer was silence. And she needed silence. She slowed her breathing, focusing on the narrow pass where darkness thickened. She could almost see it, the flash of steel, the grind of metal against stone. Not yet. Not yet. Then light. A flare arced into the sky, bathing the mountainside in harsh, unnatural white. Shadows stretched long, exaggerated, every crack and crevice revealed. Evelyn blinked against it, her scope catching the glare. And there it was. The armored silhouette, lumbering forward, flanked by figures darting in its shadow. Hale swore softly, "We're out of time." Evelyn said nothing. Her jaw clenched as she adjusted, searching for the one vulnerability she could exploit. Every machine had one. Her father's voice whispered again, unbidden, "Don't waste your bullet on what you can't break. Find the part that matters." Her eyes traced the beast of steel, exhaust vents glowing faintly in the cold air. Not much, not enough, but maybe. She steadied her breath, lifted her cheek just slightly. A shot rang out. Sparks burst against metal, not penetration, just noise. A warning. The infantry scattered briefly, shouting. The machine paused, turret swiveling. Evelyn fired again, striking near the vent. This time smoke coughed from its side, not fatal, but distracting. Enough to make them cautious, enough to slow the advance. Hale glanced at her, realization dawning. "You're not trying to kill it, you're trying to stall it." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. Another squeeze, another spark, another cough of smoke. The machine halted fully now, infantry rushing forward to cover it. Time bought, seconds, maybe minutes. Her arms ached, her eyes burned, but she held steady. Behind her, the squad watched in silence. For once, no one doubted. No one whispered. They simply looked at her, at the lone figure lying in the dirt, holding back death with nothing but patience and a rifle. And in their silence, she felt something shift. Not belief, not yet, but respect. The kind of respect born from witnessing someone do what you cannot. The rumble quieted for a moment, the valley holding its breath. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her finger resting again on the trigger. She knew this wasn't over, not even close. But for now, for one more moment, they still had a chance to survive. And sometimes, one moment was all you could ask for. The valley had fallen silent again. Too silent. Evelyn's cheek pressed against the dirt, her scope searching the shadows for the next move. Every second stretched thin, like glass about to shatter. The machine below hissed smoke from its vents, its turret swiveling with slow, deliberate menace, but it hadn't advanced. Not yet. She knew why. They were waiting. Waiting for her to tire. Waiting for her to miss. Waiting for the weight of time itself to break her steadiness. But Evelyn had lived her whole life inside silence. She could endure. Behind her, the squad shifted restlessly inside the broken hut. Boots scuffed stone. A cough broke the quiet. Their fear seeped into the air, thick and sour, but she kept her focus locked on the valley below. A whisper carried through the cracks, barely audible. "She can't hold forever." Another voice, softer, cracked, answered, "She doesn't have to, just long enough." The words sank into her chest, heavy. Long enough. That was all she had ever been asked to give. Not forever, not victory, just enough for someone else to live. A flicker of light caught her scope. Movement at the flank. They were adapting again. Infantry spreading wider, careful now. No wild rushes. They had learned what waited for them in the open. She adjusted, patient, waiting for the first silhouette to break cover. Her breath slowed, the trigger pressed. The rifle cracked. A figure crumpled. The others ducked, scattering, firing blindly into the ridge. Bullets hissed overhead, tearing bark from trees, sparking against stone. She stayed low, calm against the storm. Each shot she returned was measured, deliberate, not wasting, not rushing. One bullet, one breath, one body closer to silence. But her ammo was running thin. She felt it in the weight of her magazine, lighter with every reload. The thought pressed in, cold and unrelenting. What happens when the last round is gone? She shoved it aside. Not yet, not now. The armored machine below roared back to life, gears grinding, treads clawing at the rock. It lurched forward, smoke belching from its vents. Evelyn tracked its movement, eyes narrowing. If it cleared the pass, nothing would stop it from reaching the hut. Hale's voice came low at her side. He had crept closer, crouching behind a splintered log. "We can't stay here. They'll bury us alive." Evelyn didn't take her eye off the scope. "Then go." His jaw clenched. "And leave you." "You already tried that once." Her voice was flat, steady. "You know how that ended." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The machine advanced another meter, then another. Evelyn fired at the vent again, sparks dancing across steel. The beast slowed, coughed smoke, but kept grinding forward. Her heart pounded harder now, not from fear, but from the weight of inevitability. She couldn't stop it. She could only delay, and time was running out. Her mind slipped back, unbidden, to a different night years ago. Another ridge, another squad, the same creeping dread. Back then she had followed orders. She had retreated with the rest. And when the machine came, it had torn through the men and women she had trained beside, crushed them into silence. She had lived with that silence ever since. Not tonight. A sudden flash lit the valley, muzzle flares from the far slope. A new angle. They were trying to pin her down, force her to keep her head low while the machine pushed through. Clever, coordinated. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was strategy. She dropped flat, dirt grinding into her cheek, bullets snapping overhead. For a heartbeat she considered it, just staying down, just letting it happen. No one could blame her. No one could expect her to hold against all of it. But then she heard it. A sound behind her, soft but piercing. A soldier's sob muffled into his sleeve. Desperate, human. Her chest tightened. These weren't faceless comrades. They were boys who still prayed in whispers, men who carried pictures of children in their pockets, women who laughed quietly at night to chase away the dark. She couldn't leave them to silence. Her body moved before her mind did. She rose, pressed back into the scope, and fired. Crack. A flare went dark. Crack. Another muzzle fell silent. The machine roared closer. 20 meters, 15, 10. Its turret lifted, searching for her, hunting. Her magazine clicked empty. She reloaded with hands that trembled only once, only for a second, before the rhythm steadied again. She drew in a deep breath, whispered a silent prayer, not for herself, but for the ones behind her, and squeezed. The bullet struck true, slipping into the vent she had aimed for all along. A burst of smoke erupted, darker this time, coughing like a dying breath. The machine shuddered, halted, then let out a guttural whine as gears ground to silence. For a moment the valley froze. The squad behind her dared to lift their heads. Even Hale exhaled sharply, his disbelief audible. She had stopped it. Not destroyed, not forever, but stopped. Evelyn stayed pressed to the scope, waiting for movement, for retaliation. But none came. The infantry lingered at the tree line, hesitant now, their shadowed figures whispering uncertainty to one another. She pulled back from the rifle at last, her cheek raw from the stock, her shoulder aching deep into the bone. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but she forced herself still. Behind her, voices rose, quiet at first, then louder. Relief, hope, the kind that came only when death had been pushed back by inches. Hale touched her arm, his hand rough, trembling. His voice was hoarse. "You bought us more than time. You gave us a chance." Her eyes remained fixed on the valley. A chance isn't enough. But even as she said it, she felt the shift. Not in the enemy, not in the night, in the squad. For the first time, their whispers weren't fear. They were belief, not in victory, not in orders, in her. She let the thought settle, heavy but warm, as the cold night pressed tighter around them. The fight wasn't over. It might never be. But for the first time in years, she wasn't carrying silence alone. And that made her steady aim feel just a little lighter. The dawn broke without mercy. Its light spilled across the shattered ridgeline, washing the battlefield in pale gray and quiet fire. Smoke drifted lazily now, no longer whipped by gunfire or the roar of artillery, but by the faint breath of wind returning to a place that had held its own breath through the night. Evelyn sat against a slab of stone, rifle across her knees. Her hands were steady now, though her body begged for rest. She had not slept. None of them had. The squad was scattered across the hollow, some tending wounds, others searching the ruins for what little supplies might remain. The silence felt heavier than the fight itself. Hale lowered himself beside her. He moved slower than before, the weight of exhaustion bending his frame, but his eyes still burned with that same iron steadiness. For a moment, he didn't speak. He only watched her, as if measuring something he hadn't been sure of until now. "You saved us," he said finally. The words came raw, almost reluctant, but honest. Evelyn shook her head. "No, we survived. That's not the same." Her voice was low, frayed by the hours of holding everyone together with nothing but resolve and bullets. She couldn't let herself believe in victory. Not yet. Hale leaned back against the stone, exhaling hard. "Doesn't matter what you call it. I saw what you did. Every single one of us did, and we're here because of it." She turned her gaze toward the horizon. The mountains cut sharp against the sky, their ridges carrying the scars of shelling, their valleys holding secrets of the dead. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay the extraction point, the chance of a way home, but it felt impossibly far. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from the memory of faces she would never see again, the ones who hadn't made it to this sunrise. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "what the cost of a single shot really is? Not just the life it takes, but the weight it leaves behind." Hale looked at her then, longer than before. "Every day," he admitted, "but I've also learned something. Sometimes it isn't about what we lose, it's about what we manage to keep." The words struck something in her. She wanted to believe them, needed to, but a shadow lingered, carved deep into her chest, the knowledge that she could never put down this rifle without carrying the memory of when she had lifted it. Movement stirred across the hollow. Corporal Ruiz limped forward, his bandaged leg dragging slightly, but determination in every step. His eyes flicked from Evelyn to Hale, then down to the weapon across her knees. "When the next report gets written," Ruiz said, his voice rough but steady, "they'll talk about you. About the woman who kept the ridge from falling. About the sniper who didn't miss." Evelyn's jaw clenched. "They won't talk about the ones who bled beside me." Ruiz paused, then crouched low to her level. "Maybe not, but we will. Every one of us who's left will carry them. That's how it works. We don't get to choose what history remembers, but we do get to choose what we do with it." His words cut deeper than the silence. She wanted to argue, to reject the idea of becoming some whispered legend in reports, but something in the way he said it, simple, matter of fact, made her realize this was not about fame. It was about survival finding meaning. The sun climbed higher. Light touched her rifle, gleaming faintly against the dull steel. She stared at it for a long time, as if seeing it for the first time and the last. The extraction beacon crackled faintly in the distance, its static broken by a signal too weak to make out clearly. They weren't abandoned. Not entirely. Help was coming, but slowly and not without risk. They still had to hold. Evelyn pushed herself to her feet. Her muscles screamed, her knees stiff, but she didn't falter. She looked across the battered squad, each face worn with exhaustion, each pair of eyes waiting for direction, for certainty, for something to believe in. She swallowed the knot in her throat. "We move at dusk," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Until then, we hold this ground. No one breaks. No one gets left behind." There was no cheer, no rallying cry, only nods, tired but resolute. And in that quiet agreement, something stronger than noise settled among them. The hours bled together. They reinforced what cover they could, shared rations that barely counted as food, bandaged wounds that refused to close. Each soldier carried their own story of why they were here, what they'd left behind, what they longed to return to. Evelyn listened when they spoke in low voices. Hale talked of the son he hadn't seen in 2 years, his words clipped, as if each one cost him more than any bullet. Ruiz whispered about his mother's cooking, the smell of garlic and oil, how he swore he'd never take it for granted again. Even the youngest of them, Private Lennox, admitted through trembling hands that he feared he'd never live long enough to make mistakes outside the uniform. Their confessions weighed heavy, but they also bound them. They weren't just soldiers. They were fragments of lives held together in the thin thread of survival. As dusk crawled near, Evelyn climbed higher up the ridge, the wind sharp against her face. From there she could see the valley below, scarred, blackened, but quiet. Too quiet. Her scope scanned the distance. Movement flickered at the edge of the trees, shadows shifting, waiting. The enemy wasn't gone. They were patient and they would come again. Her breath steadied. The world narrowed into the circle of her scope, and for one suspended moment she felt the weight of everything. Her father's silence the night he left for his last tour, her mother's hands trembling as she folded the flag, the letters she'd never written, the words she'd never said. This wasn't just a battlefield. It was the place where every choice she had ever made converged into one. Her finger brushed the trigger. But then she stopped. The shot could wait. She knew they would come. She knew she would be ready. But for the first time, she let herself lower the rifle, not in surrender, but in quiet defiance. She would not let this weapon be the only definition of who she was. She breathed out slowly, a breath that carried grief and resolve and something like peace. The squad gathered at her signal. Packs were shouldered, weapons checked, eyes scanning the fading light. They were broken but not beaten. Hale placed a hand on her shoulder before they moved. Just one word, lead. She nodded once, not with pride, not with triumph, but with the steady understanding that survival was not about glory. It was about responsibility. The ridge faded behind them as they moved into the darkening forest, their silhouettes swallowed by shadows. The enemy would follow. The fight was not over, but something had shifted. Evelyn carried no illusion of being a hero. She carried only the quiet truth that sometimes retreat is not defeat. Sometimes it is the only path left to preserve what still matters. And as the last light of dusk bled into night, she felt it. Not victory, not relief, but a fragile, enduring dignity. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.